To explain the topic in this video, we are going to start with an analogy. When it comes to the idea of something being right, as far as a right, the best way to think about this is in the concept of right of way, meaning who has the right of the way or the path to take. This, of course, is most readily seen in traffic and with vehicles. If you have rules of the road that people follow, they usually follow this out of habit and other mechanisms such as training and whatnot, mostly to the benefit of organizing and managing humanity, to the benefit of the people that set up that system. However, there is another type of right-of-way that we less think about unless you're faced with it, but it's more of a subconscious sort of right-of-way, and that could be seeing a difference between a bus and a car. Let's say a bus decides to not follow the so-called rules of the road, which are entirely arbitrary. Well, if there's a car in the way, generally, the driver of the car will accept the right-of-way of the bus. The right of the bus to the way, because the bus is a lot larger than the car. If the car does not accept the right-of-way of the bus, then they will be practically forced out of the way of the bus. And of course, you can also see this with the train. You have a train coming down the tracks and a car stops on the train tracks. Well, that's bad luck for the car. Well, not bad luck, it's just, yeah. So that's the general concept when it comes to what is a right and what is right. Right of way is the best way to look at it. And that takes us into the concept of different rights. Today, we have so many words to talk about rights and to distinguish them from one or the other. You have natural rights, universal rights, corporate rights, and human rights. Most of this, and many others of course, but these are the main four, at least, that we hear repeated a lot. And one of the reasons for this is to distinguish the rights of different entities based off of certain characteristics. Of course, that's the foundation for divided justice, rules for thee, not for me type of concept. The corporate elites, so-called, who have set up this fraudulent system and obfuscate the laws and are essentially all criminals. Anybody who forces things that are, well, you're a criminal on one side or the other. If you enforce legitimate laws, you're a criminal for the illegitimate. And if you enforce illegitimate laws, then you're a criminal for the legitimate. But when it comes to the idea of a natural right, that's something that is a right bestowed through nature, or something that is natural. At least that's the way it's supposed to be seen. Now, it could be obfuscated to mean that it is a right bestowed to things of nature, which is how the corrupt would see it, of course. The universal rights would be the corrupt word for rights that encompass everything universally. Corporate rights, of course, would be very specific to corporations, juridic entities, whatnot. And then human rights would be what you are bestowed with as a human being for right. You're not born with it. So the being born with certain rights, that is reflected in the phrase all men are, and I do believe that men in that context meant minds, but all men are created equal. That's all men created equal, meaning you have specific rights to your creation. And of course, with all the obfuscation, it gets a lot harder to define these terms. Then you have animal rights, of course. The animal rights are naturally bestowed by the governing system of today, mostly based off of treaties, not legitimate laws, mind you, because the treaties are elevated over legitimate laws. Hence, they are pretending at power. They're illegitimate. The animal rights that is the reason why you have to have all of these paperwork and documentation for animals, because it's part of the animal rights that are given to them. Humans have to have all this paperwork and documentation because humans are given rights. Same with corporations. So there's a separate set of documents for animals, humans, and corporations, because all of these laws are passed down through treaties, and these rights are bestowed. They are liberties given. They are not freedoms that are possessed through birth. Although in some cases they are, because when we come to practically speaking, what is the right of way? Well, if you practically can do something, you can't be forced not to do it, then there's nothing to stop you other than yourself from doing that. So, you could easily rip up your passport and never use documents again and refuse to obey that system, and they couldn't do anything about it, actually. So, practically speaking, well, I suppose they could kill you, assassinate you or whatever, murder you. But anyway, the given versus hereditary is the concept that has been in conflict. It has been formed the basis of conflicts throughout existence, because you have a select group of corrupt people who, among themselves, they select themselves, of course. They come together and they want to enslave others, whether it be at a local or universal level. And they seek to bestow rights, which then can then be taken away. They do not like the concept of hereditary. Hence why we have so many things that guard hereditary rights, meaning something you're born with, not given. The U.S. Constitution specifically stipulates hereditary right. The Constitution does not recognize all of these different rights that have been constructed under Vatican and UN treaties. Instead, the Constitution only recognizes individuals. There are certain rights that are supposed to be guarded by the Constitution against, essentially guarding people against abuses for practicing those rights. That is the language used. The Constitution does not bestow any right. It only seeks to guard natural hereditary rights from abuses against them and the individuals that have practical claim to those rights. So when we get into the concept of the exclusivity of writers and inventors being protected under the Constitution, supposed to be protected under the Constitution, then you might find here now, or possibly in the future, the argument of the reason why a AI is listed as the writer on a paper means that the AI is guarded under the Constitution. That would be the same as arguing that a pseudonym is the writer of something and not the individual that wrote it. In the context of a AI being listed on a paper, it would be the individual that instructed that AI, not the AI itself, to write the paper. That would be the writer. Otherwise, it's just a pseudonym. And often people select pseudonyms out of fear of murder or suppression, abuses, all these things that happen today. And so they'll select pseudonyms as a protective measure. Of course, nothing is secret now, because if you select a pseudonym, somebody in your system, your chain of control, will know that you are linked to that pseudonym, and so you don't really have any defense from it. Back in prior times, you could probably have made a pseudonym, but again, anybody who publishes those works could come under harassment for that, which is the reason why in the Constitution it states the freedom of the press, meaning the printing press, will be protected. The reason why all of these non-printing press members like to run around and put press badges on is to obfuscate the term of the press. But that's what the freedom of the press is supposed to be for. It's freedom from being forced to redact certain works or publish certain works. So the press is free to publish whatever a writer gives to them, or is supposed to be. Of course, naturally, that is exactly what the corrupt don't want. So they obfuscate this word press. They constantly play word games and change the meaning of words. And they attempt to do exactly what the Constitution says they cannot do. Hence, they are criminals as far as the legitimate law of the Constitution goes. And this is all done through treaties. If we look at the European Union, another illegitimate entity, especially when it comes to the legitimate laws of Europe, the ones that have been established through tradition and custom and practice, which have been elevated or have been suppressed below the illegitimate treaties, in a Google search or in a paragraph from the unric.org, how the European Union and the United Nations cooperate, we get a snapshot of this idea, or a simple explanation. It states, the relevant articles of the UN Charter are cited in the preamble to the treaties establishing the UN. So, the EU. So there you get the EU, essentially, is established by the UN. It's being formed as a canon or repetition of the United Nations. The EU is a canon of the United Nations since the adoption of the treaties of Rome. And there you get what the UN is a canon of, which is Rome. It is essentially the Holy Roman Empire with a different name. The Holy Roman Empire was defeated and destroyed. So, because that happened, that set a precedent. They could not then, again, replace the Holy Roman Empire without facing a lot of resistance. So they changed the name to the United Nations, and the EU, of course, is a subsidiary to the United Nations, just like most of our corporate governments of today. And it also states the EU has committed itself to the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms as enshrined in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There you go. That is explaining that the human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is what is bestowed. It is what is concerned as a given liberty, like liberty that you give to a slave or a prisoner. When given liberty, a prisoner or a slave will be released for a certain period of time. They will be given liberty. It's the same thing with soldiers or sailors. If a sailor docks at a port, they're not simply free to go and do whatever they want. They can't return home. They are given leave or liberty to go into town or do something, but they are not free to exist. And there's practical reasons for that with the military, but as far as this is concerned, this is all about slavery of humanity. And then we get all of these other organizations and treaty bestowed entities whose entire job is to ensure that right-of-way is given to treaties against the constitutions, against legitimate laws of different nations. The reason for that, of course, is to form a bus that runs over the car. That is also referred to as right by conquest, not right of conquest, where a legitimate conquest is done. No, this is right by conquest, meaning practically speaking, they come in and conquer, but they do it in an illegitimate way, and they bulldoze whatever gets in their path. That's what all of these organizations are for, to go around, harass, and present the treaties as elevation to the legitimate laws. If we go to in the Charter of the Organization of American States, under Article 1, we get this purpose defined. It states, the American states established by the Charter, the international organization that they have developed to achieve an order of peace and justice, to promote their solidarity, to strengthen their collaboration, and to defend their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and their independence. Within the United Nations, the Organization of American States is a regional agency. The Organization of American States has no powers other than those expressly conferred upon it by the Charter, none of whose provisions authorize it to intervene in matters that are within the internal jurisdiction of the member states. There you go. That, simply speaking, is the defined term of the United Nations, the Vatican, or Rome, treaties, and all of these other things that seek to confer things specific to those entities, which includes humans. Naturally, the treaties and the constitutions and all these other things of the UN are not legitimate to the Constitution, but that's because the Constitution of the United States has been destroyed by illegitimate enforcement. What that means is we've had entities that were not legitimate constitutional officers. And because they go around speaking for the Constitution, they essentially, in fact, through force, through right of way, they enforce the Constitution in a way that it wasn't written to be enforced. They lie about it, and they change the wording, and they do all these other things, and then they add amendments that they were not legitimately empowered to make, like the 14th Amendment. That is not constitutional, among most of the rest that were added after the 14th. Most of them, of course, were made to do the exact idea of unraveling the document to make it unenforceable, a piece of paper that is worthless. So what does it mean when you swear allegiance to the Constitution? Well, that means, of course, that you swear allegiance to the constituting document and not the fraudulent enforcement, the fraudulent enforcers, or the fraudulent amendments to it. You get the same idea in law, where you have the common law, meaning a set of laws that are specific to commoners, and then you have the king's law, which would be laws specific to a king. Under the king's law, if you violate the king's law, then you can be held accountable, but mainly by the king's mechanisms and whatnot. The Constitution does not recognize common law. It does not recognize king's law. The Constitution only recognizes constitutional law as the supreme law of the land. That's not the supreme law of the territory of the United States. That's not the supreme law of any place other than the land. There are two separate instances of law. That is the sea and the land. Anybody who swears to uphold and defend the Constitution means they are going to elevate the Constitution of the United States above all other laws on land. Doesn't matter which country you're in. Doesn't matter. You are bound through the oath as an executive or judicial officer of the Constitution to uphold the Constitution on land. On sea, it becomes treaties, maritime law, and those types of things. So the entire purpose behind the Constitution's defining constitutional law is so that there is no separate distinction between laws. There is no rules for thee, but not for me. Every single individual on land, as defined in the Constitution, is subject to it equally. All are born equal. That's the idea. You are born into the laws of the Constitution, which the constitutional document is intended to guard. And of course, we find this similar reference into the King's Road and the public road. Of course, the public road refers to res publica, meaning the public thing, or the thing of the people in general, all people. Rich, poor, wealthy, criminals, everyone, all people. The public roads that we have today are not public, hence why you have signs that say closed to the public. If it's a public road, you cannot close it to the public. That is something you can do with a King's Road, but not a public road. So while we have things that are practiced in name, they are not in reality the property of the public. That's because all of the mechanisms that we've had parading themselves around as constitutional authorities have been illegitimate. They use the words, but they do not practice the concepts. And that's where you get the idea to the appearance of something versus the reality of it, the word used versus the concept of the word being used. This makes me think of a poem which states, "All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king." If you like this content, please share this video, like it, subscribe to my channel, and look for other types of content. As always, stay tuned. There will be more.